What if the greatest threat to your peace and well-being in your golden years isn't illness or financial insecurity, but the very relationships you've spent decades nurturing? The painful truth many seniors discover too late is that some connections deplete the limited energy we have left, drain our hard-earned resources, and rob us of the serenity we've worked a lifetime to achieve. I'm Vernon, and for most of my life, I lived by the principle that family is family, and it was my responsibility to maintain harmony in all relationships, regardless of personal cost. That philosophy nearly cost me my health, my retirement savings, and most critically, the peaceful final chapters I had worked so hard to create. What I've learned through experience, research, and conversations with hundreds of fellow seniors is this: the relationship rules that served us in our younger years can become chains that bind us to unnecessary suffering in our later years. Today, we're exploring the delicate art of protecting your peace by identifying 5 types of relationships that may need thoughtful recalibration as we age, balanced with nurturing the positive connections that help us thrive. In the next few minutes, I'll identify 5 types of people who, regardless of their intentions, may be undermining your well-being at this crucial life stage. Pay particular attention to type number 3. It revealed to me why so many of my long-term relationships had become sources of frustration rather than joy. And it might do the same for you. This isn't about abandoning people who are merely imperfect or occasionally difficult. We're all flawed humans, after all. Rather, this is about recognizing patterns of interaction that consistently diminish your energy, compromise your health, or threaten your security at a life stage when recovery becomes increasingly costly. It's also about understanding that creating appropriate distance isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. In our later years, this becomes not just advice, but a necessity for survival and continued contribution. If you found the video helpful, please subscribe to my channel and share this video to help others discover these insights. Before we explore these relationship patterns, let's consider why protecting your peace becomes not just important, but essential in your senior years. Your accumulated wisdom has earned you the right to prioritize relationships that nurture rather than deplete. As the Dalai Lama wisely noted, do not let the behavior of others destroy your inner peace. In these precious years, guarding your tranquility isn't selfish. It's the foundation upon which your health, happiness, and continued contributions to others depend. The renowned neurologist Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research reveals that our ability to recover from stress diminishes significantly after 60. What your body and mind could bounce back from in your 40s now creates lasting impacts on your health and cognition. Now, let's examine the first relationship pattern that often threatens this hard-earned peace. My longtime friend Harold encountered this with his adult daughter, Melissa. At 65, Harold had just settled into retirement when Melissa, then 42, began experiencing a series of escalating emergencies. Her car needed repairs she couldn't afford. Her roommate unexpectedly moved out. Her hours at work were reduced. Each situation was presented as an immediate crisis requiring Harold's financial intervention. What Harold gradually realized was that these weren't isolated incidents, but a pattern that had existed for decades, but that he could no longer afford to enable as his own resources became finite. The first relationship pattern to reconsider involves those who seem to exist in a constant state of emergency, with life delivering one catastrophe after another. Research published in the Journal of Aging Studies found that seniors who maintained relationships with high drama patterns experienced significantly elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone directly linked to heart disease, cognitive decline, and immune system suppression. The challenge with crisis creators is that their emergencies often contain just enough legitimate need to trigger our helping instinct, especially when they're family. The solution isn't heartless abandonment, but rather a shift in how we respond. For Harold, this meant establishing planned support, replacing emergency bailouts with scheduled, budgeted assistance. He'll help with his daughter's car repair next month when his pension payment arrives, or in the meantime, let's look into public transportation options. By removing the adrenaline rush of emergency response, Harold found that many of Melissa's crises resolved themselves. Others revealed themselves as opportunities for her to develop problem-solving skills. Their relationship, initially strained by this boundary, eventually improved as it shifted to a more adult-to-adult dynamic. To identify crisis creators in your life, notice who consistently presents their problems as more urgent and catastrophic than they actually are. And after interactions with them, ask yourself, do I feel energized by having helped or depleted by having been emotionally manipulated? Share your experience in the comments to help others discover these insights. Remember, creating distance from crisis creators doesn't mean abandoning people with legitimate needs. It means refusing to participate in manufactured emergencies and offering support in ways that honor your limitations and encourage their growth. While crisis creators drain our resources through external emergencies, our next relationship challenge works in a more subtle way, depleting our inner emotional reserves until there's little left for ourselves. These individuals possess an uncanny ability to leave you feeling exhausted rather than enriched after interactions. Your accomplishments are minimized, your challenges magnified, and your emotional needs consistently overlooked. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that almost all of our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people. While perhaps overly pessimistic as a general principle, this insight becomes painfully relevant when applied to persistently one-sided relationships. Carlos, a 72-year-old retired teacher, encountered this with a neighbor in his retirement community. Initially welcomed into the community's social circle, this neighbor dominates every conversation with complaints about the management, other residents, and various health issues, never once asking about others' experiences. Carlos noticed that attendance at community events dropped whenever this neighbor was present, and he himself began feeling exhausted after their interactions. After consulting with other community members who shared similar feelings, Carlos helped establish activity groups with clearer structures that prevented any one person from dominating. This created natural boundaries without direct confrontation, allowing the social ecosystem to rebalance itself. Dr. Janice Kikold-Glaser at Ohio State University has conducted groundbreaking studies showing that negative social interactions can actually suppress immune function and slow wound healing in older adults. Put simply, emotionally draining relationships don't just feel exhausting, they can literally impair your physical health. To identify these emotional drains in your circle, notice who consistently dominates conversations with their needs, rarely expresses genuine interest in your experiences, and after spending time with them, you feel noticeably depleted rather than uplifted or engaged. The practical approach isn't necessarily complete removal from your life, but rather mindful management of exposure. Schedule these interactions when you're at your strongest, limit their duration, and always plan restorative activities afterward. Your emotional health in these golden years is too precious to sacrifice on one-sided relationships. As we age, our identities naturally evolve and deepen. Yet some relationships become challenging precisely because others refuse to acknowledge this growth, holding us captive to outdated versions of ourselves. These might be the high school friend who still expects you to be the wild risk-taker you were at 17, the sibling who still assigns you the family role you played at 10, or the colleague who can't see beyond the professional identity you've since outgrown. My brother Robert and I had always been close, but as we entered our 60s, I began noticing a troubling pattern. Though I'd spent the past decade developing a spiritual practice and becoming more contemplative, Robert continued to relate to me as the materialistic, status-conscious businessman I'd been in my 40s. Robert's seemingly harmless teasing of my more obvious spiritual change revealed something deeper. Robert was uncomfortable with my evolution. My change challenged his own choices and perhaps his memory of our shared past. This phenomenon has been extensively studied by researchers like Dr. Laura Carstensen at Stanford University, who has documented how our identities naturally undergo significant shifts as we age, with many adults moving toward more meaning-focused priorities. Those who resist or deny this evolution and others often do so from their own fear of change. What makes these relationships particularly challenging is their foundation in shared history and genuine affection. The key to addressing them lies not in severing connection, but in gently yet firmly establishing who you are now, while accepting that some people may never fully see or affirm your current self. For me, this meant having one direct conversation with Robert, expressing how his characterization affected me, then making peace with his limitations while adjusting our interactions to areas where we could connect authentically in the present. Before moving forward, take a moment to reflect on which relationships in your life might be holding you in outdated identities, rather than supporting your continued growth and evolution. If you feel like this type of person is appearing in your current life, please share your specific story in the comment so we can support you. Beyond the challenges of identity and emotional energy, another sensitive dimension emerges as we age: the complex interplay between relationships and finances, particularly inheritance expectations. These individuals' attention often increases as your wealth does. Their interest in your health seems tinged with calculation, and their financial advice typically centers around decisions that would ultimately benefit them. The Greek philosopher Epicurus observed that nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is too little. This insight perfectly captures the insatiable nature of those who are always oriented toward what more they might receive in the future. Margaret encountered this reality with her nephew, whom she'd always treated like a son. After her husband's passing left her with a modest but comfortable estate, she noticed subtle but concerning changes in her nephew's behavior. He began visiting more frequently, which at first seemed like a blessing. But then she noticed the visits always included casual questions about her investments, whether she still needed such a big house, and if she'd updated her will recently. When Margaret mentioned she was considering a European river cruise, a dream she and her late husband had shared, her nephew responded with concern, "Is that a wise use of resources at this stage?" The implication was clear. Every dollar spent was one less dollar inherited. According to the National Council on Aging, financial abuse costs older Americans between $2.9 billion and $36.5 billion annually, with family members and caregivers being the perpetrators in 57% of cases. What makes this pattern particularly difficult to address is that financial considerations often intermingle with genuine care. The same nephew who questions your excessive spending may also faithfully drive you to medical appointments. It's important to acknowledge that not all family members expressing financial concern are exploitation risks. In many cultures and families, financial interdependence and oversight are expressions of legitimate care. The key distinction lies in whether these discussions enhance or diminish your autonomy and dignity. For Margaret, addressing this situation required establishing clear boundaries around financial discussions, while acknowledging her nephew's legitimate concerns. She's noticed their conversations often turn to her assets and spending. She finds that uncomfortable and would prefer they focus on sharing experiences rather than discussing her finances. To identify potential inheritance anticipators in your circle, notice who shows increased attention when financial matters arise, who seems overly concerned with your spending or asset allocation, who reacts negatively to your generosity toward others, or who frames your enjoyment of your resources as somehow irresponsible. Remember, creating boundaries with inheritance anticipators isn't about assuming the worst of loved ones. It's about recognizing that financial interests can unconsciously distort relationships, and protecting both your assets and your emotional well-being from this distortion. I'd love to hear your experiences with navigating financial boundaries in your relationships. Have you encountered situations where your spending choices were questioned? How did you address it? Share your story in the comments below. Your insight might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. While financial concerns affect many seniors, almost all of us will encounter our final relationship challenge: those who systematically undermine our knowledge, experience, and decision-making capacity, often believing they're acting in our best interest. At 66, my colleague David, a retired professor of economics, found himself increasingly frustrated with his adult children's approach to his decision-making. Despite a lifetime of financial expertise, his suggestions were met with patronizing responses like, "Things are different now," or "Let them handle this." It's complicated with all the new technology. The breaking point came when David mentioned he was considering downsizing, and his daughter immediately took over, scheduling viewings without consulting him and speaking to realtors on his behalf, as if he were incapable of representing his own interests. This type of interaction has been extensively studied by gerontologists, who sometimes call it elder speak or implicit ageism. Dr. Becca Levy at Yale University has documented how being treated as cognitively diminished actually creates measurable negative impacts on cognitive function. Essentially, being treated as less capable can actually make you less capable over time. These individuals interrupt when you speak, explain things you already understand, make decisions without consulting you, and generally treat your accumulated wisdom as irrelevant or outdated. For David, addressing this pattern required direct conversations about autonomy and respect. He began telling his children that he appreciates their concern, but they need you to ask before taking action on his behalf. He's still fully capable of making his own decisions. He also maintained independent relationships with professionals, his own financial advisor, lawyer, and doctor with whom his children had no direct contact. This ensured that critical information came to him first, and decisions remained firmly in his control. It's important to recognize that in some situations, especially those involving significant health challenges, family members may need to take a more active role in decision-making. The key is ensuring this happens with dignity, transparency, and as much autonomy preservation as possible. To identify such patterns in your relationships, notice who regularly interrupts you, explains things you already understand, makes decisions on your behalf without consultation, or treats your perspectives as outdated or irrelevant due to your age. Having explored these 5 relationship patterns that often challenge our well-being in later years, let's now turn to practical solutions that honor both our needs and our connections. We seek neither complete estrangement from difficult people, especially family, nor continued self-sacrifice at the destructive relationships. Instead, we aim for what psychologists call detached concern, maintaining compassion for others while detaching our emotional well-being from their choices and behaviors. Here are 5 strategies that I and many others have found effective. First, The limited engagement approach. This involves maintaining contact, but carefully controlling its frequency, duration, and context. For example, meeting in public settings rather than private homes, scheduling phone calls rather than accepting unpredictable drop-ins, and planning activities with clear beginning and end time. Second, the redirect and refocus method. When conversations turn to draining territories, excessive complaints, inappropriate financial inquiries, or dismissive comments, gently but firmly change the subject. Third, the boundary declaration. Sometimes the indirect approaches aren't sufficient, and clear verbal boundaries become necessary. Statements like, "I'm not comfortable discussing my financial plans. I need you to speak to me directly rather than through others." Or, "I don't have the capacity to help with this particular situation," are not unkind. They're honest and ultimately respectful of both yourself and the other person. Fourth, the support system enhancement. Increasing time with positive, energizing relationships naturally reduces time available for draining ones. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does your social calendar. Fill it intentionally with people who recognize and respect your wisdom, autonomy, and boundaries. Finally, the professional buffer. For particularly difficult family situations, especially those involving financial matters, consider engaging professional intermediaries. Financial advisors, elder law attorneys, and even therapists can serve as buffers, providing objective perspectives and reducing direct conflict while protecting your interests. As we age, our capacity to absorb emotional stress diminishes even as our wisdom to recognize it increases. This isn't weakness. It's the body's intelligence directing limited energy toward essential functions. Honoring this reality through appropriate boundaries isn't selfish. It's a form of wisdom that benefits everyone involved. As we bring our exploration to a close, I'm reminded of the beautiful concept from Eastern philosophy of the second mountain, the idea that life often contains two major quests. The first involves establishing ourselves in the world, career, family, social standing. The second, which many of us climb in our later years, involves finding meaning, legacy, and peace. Yet it's equally important to acknowledge that while some relationships benefit from greater distance, others deserve deeper investment. Research consistently shows that positive social connections directly impact physical health, cognitive function, and emotional well-being as we age. A Harvard study spanning nearly 80 years concluded that relationships are the single strongest predictor of whether people remain happy and healthy throughout their lives. But crucially, this research emphasizes quality over quantity. A few nourishing connections contribute far more to well-being than numerous draining ones. As you recalibrate certain relationships, consider which positive connections might receive more of your precious time and energy. I recognize that the cultural context of relationship obligations varies tremendously. In many Eastern and collectivist cultures, the individualistic approach to boundaries described here may seem at odds with deeply held values about family duty and filial piety. These cultural perspectives contain profound wisdom about interdependence and the sacred nature of family bonds. The principles we've discussed can be adapted rather than abandoned within these contexts. Creating boundaries need not mean diminishing responsibility. Rather, it means fulfilling those responsibilities in ways that honor both your dignity and your obligations. Even within the most traditional family structures, there are ways to preserve your essence while honoring your commitments. I invite you to conduct a gentle but honest inventory of your relationships using the patterns we've discussed. Where do you recognize the crisis creator, the emotional vampire, the frozen in timekeeper, the inheritance anticipator, or the wisdom dismisser? And more importantly, where do you find the soul nourishers, the growth encouragers, the authentic seers, the joy bringers? Remember that distance need not mean disappearance. If you found value in today's exploration, please share it with others who might benefit. Leave a comment about your own experiences with creating healthy boundaries in later life, or questions you'd like addressed in future episodes. Subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming video. If you want to learn more about how to increase your independence and become a wise older adult, check out the previous video, Over 70 and No Friends, 7 Reasons to Embrace Your Independence and Joy. You can find the link in the video description below. Thank you for spending time with me, and I'll see you in the next video.